Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me right now. Welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Trauma and Promoting Resiliency Among Youth, hosted by the Resource Basket and Alaska After School Network. Today's webinar is part of our Supporting Youth series. My name is Amy Gorn, and I am your host for this hour-long training. I am a team member with the Resource Basket, which is an online training and technical assistance center for those who work with or support rural Alaska Native youth. Before we get started, I want to review a few things that may be helpful for you. On the bottom left-hand side of the screen, we will put into the chat box the call-in information if you are unable to access or use your computer speakers for audio. If you are joining us on the teleconference line, you have been placed in listen-only mode. If you are listening through your computer, hopefully you hear this, and check that your volume is turned all the way up. We will have time at the end to engage with your questions. We will not be opening the teleconference line for questions, so please type questions in the chat box at the end or email resourcebasket@ruralcap.com, and we'll go through them at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available on Alaska Native Youth website, the Resource Basket website. We also have closed captioning provided today at the bottom left-hand side of the screen. All our former online trainings are archived on our website at our webinars drop-down menu. Again, that is alaskanativeYouth.org. I will send an email to registrants with the link to access today's recording, as well as additional resources. At the end of this training, you will be asked to fill out a brief online survey about it. Points of view or opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention or the U.S. Department of Justice. Now we'll take a look around the webinar screen. On the top of the screen, there is an arrow pointing to a little person with its hand raised. Click that if you need assistance, and then clear the status when done. We will monitor chat box in the lower right-hand corner. So let's check out that function. If you're joining us online and are viewing as a group at a computer, go ahead and type in the chat box how many there are of you and where you're from. If you're watching by yourself, just write a hello and where you're from. That way we can get to know everyone better. Looks like multiple of our awesome list of attendees are starting to share how many are gathered together and viewing our webinar today and where from. Togiak, Dillingham, Sitka, and so on. This is just wonderful. So please continue doing so, and we'll keep an eye on that. We're also going to use throughout this training hour interactive polls. This is a way for us to pull you into your learning experience. So we're going to start off with one of these polls, also in a way to get to know everyone better, and also in our attempt to just practice utilizing this feature. So please go ahead now and select what role you are representing yourself today on the webinar, such as a volunteer, a worker, a service provider, etc. And again, if you're sharing a computer, you can decide on a consensus vote. We'll get that up for you in just a moment. Okay, we have the poll ready for you. So please select in which capacity are you attending today's webinar so that we can get to know you better. We also have other there. There it is, other. Great, seems like everyone's starting to get a handle of using this interactive polling feature. We're seeing a good number of you who work or volunteer directly with youth. We see some who are in the education field as well as the behavioral health field, A good number of you work in juvenile justice and other. Great, we're going to follow up this poll with just one other. So please participate for just one more moment, and then we're going to open up the next one. All right, now hopefully you can all see the variety of you who are attending today's webinar with Desiree and the Resource Basket. Okay, we're going to pull up the next one, and now that we know a little bit of your role that you are attending today's webinar, we're going to then ask about who you serve. So our next poll will address who you serve. Give us just a moment, we'll pull that one up. Just think about if you are, oh, I think we're almost there. And again, if you haven't written into the chat box on the lower right-hand side, how many of you are gathered at your computer or where you're from, please go ahead and do that. All right. So this is just answering in on your own. Through your role, who are you serving in general? Great, so we're seeing youth and families in Bristol Bay, youth ages 6 to 16 years old students, primary care that you're attending today on behalf of staff training. We'll give it another moment. We have incarcerated youth from remote areas, youth all the way from 5 to 24 years of age. This is great. Adolescent males, to be specific. Great. All right. Well, I think we've gotten a handle on how this poll feature works, and we've gotten a smattering of learning more about you, so I'm going to go ahead and close this now. Thanks, everyone, for participating with that. So our presenter today is Desiree Compton. Desiree is a licensed professional counselor and certified drug dependency counselor who currently practices as a primary care consultant in Wasilla. She is a trained ACERS presenter and also teaches introductory psychology classes at the UAA Eagle River campus. Desiree is passionate about supporting young people, their families, and service providers in order to facilitate a trauma-informed community where people can develop into their full potential. She has lived in the Mat-Su Valley for over 25 years, and she has 3 children, including a 15-year-old son and twin 12-year-old daughters. She is also an enthusiastic snowboarder and motorcyclist who enjoys nature and being active. Thank you so much for being here today, Desiree. We're going to turn it over to you and ask that you make sure your microphone is enabled. Thank you.
Great. Are you guys able to hear me? Yay. Not sure. I'm hoping so. Yes, I see a yes from Zoe. Thank you, Zoe. And then we did have actually one more poll question. I don't know if Amy, if you've got that. I just want to kind of get an understanding of how much everybody already kind of knows about neurobiology. And so while she's pulling that, I guess what I wanted to share with you guys first to kind of open it up is, I've done a lot of presentations. I've never done a webinar, so I might turn my camera off and on throughout this. If you prefer it off, type it in the chat if it's too distracting, or if you think it's better to be able to see me, just chat with us and let us know. So a few days ago, when I found out there were so many people interested in this webinar, I started getting really nervous. And I was wondering, am I going to be too technical? Am I going to stumble over my words? Am I not going to be technical enough? And then I just had this really cool aha moment, and I thought, I made like 3 bullets to myself, and I said, number 1, make it personal and connect with the audience. So I do have some slides. We are going to go over some technical things, but I think it's more important to make that connection with you all. because that's what we're going to be talking about today is connecting with people. And I also thought that I should share some of my own experiences because I know, you know, when I teach psychology, we know that if you make learning active, you're going to be more likely to retain information. And that means a lot of time making the information meaningful to you. So I don't know how many of you know about ACEs. I'm imagining probably a lot of you do. And sorry, I'm getting distracted by all this clicking. We'll talk about that later, but you know, for all of you that already are aware, there is I believe, a handout somewhere where you can find your ACE score, or you can even just Google it, little one-page sheet like this, and you can have a score between 0 and 10. And essentially, the higher your score, ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, the more likely you are to have a lot of problems later on, and we'll talk about that. But my ACE score is 9, and so that's pretty high. And if I looked at the statistics, they would tell me that I would definitely not be here teaching all of you today. I would be in jail or dead or suffering from some significant problems. So how did that happen? And that's what I really want to talk to you a lot about, is resiliency. I believe very strongly that we kind of create the world by what we focus on. So I want you to understand trauma. I'm going to talk to you about the brain, but I really want to focus more on resiliency, because I feel like if we just talk about the problem, then we make the problem bigger, right? The more we focus on it, the bigger it gets. But if we instead talk about resiliency, how there's people like me that can overcome adverse childhood experiences, and we promote that, then we're going to be more focused on that. So before I go on, you know, to answer the question, how did I get here? The one question that I didn't endorse on the ACE screening is, let's see, there was one, did you ever feel, question number 5, did you ever feel like you didn't have enough, oh no, I'm sorry, question 4, see there I go stumbling all over myself. Question 4, did you ever feel like nobody ever loved you or thought you were special? Or did you ever feel like nobody looked out for you? And that's the one I didn't endorse. I always had people in my life, teachers, a nurse, a counselor, you know, not huge, big influences, but they were believing in me and caring about me, and that's what got me through. And so when I was really freaking out about this presentation, I thought, what is my goal? What is my hopes? And I want there to be more people that helped me. And so my takeaway is that I hope you guys will take away from this and learn how to promote resiliency in other people. Let's see. I'm just looking at the survey. It looks like, I didn't see it. Sorry. Okay, not familiar, somewhat familiar, very familiar. So the majority of you guys do not have a lot of education about neurobiology, so that's helpful for me to know. So I'll go over it a little bit slower and not just rush through it. If you want to find your ACE score, that's awesome. If not, no, don't worry about it. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can navigate now.
This is fine because I got through my presentation pretty fast when I practiced. So don't stress out. We'll get through the important stuff. Okay, awesome. I apologize. So this is your brain. Now, when I speak with children and families, I'm trying to get rid of that echo. There we go. I apologize. That was my backup computer deciding to work again. So I really want to break this down Barney style. And I know there's probably a lot of educated people, and some of this is going to be review. But my goal is that you are going to be able to understand this. It's such an easy way to understand that you are going to be able to go out there and teach other people and use these same words and same ideas. And ideally that you're going to be able to connect with young people, people with developmental delays, people that are a little less educated. So this is the brain for the educated view. And this is my first time doing this with a webcam, so I hope you can see this correctly. Okay, yeah, it looks pretty good. So when I talk to a family, I say this is your brain. You know, really it's in here, but pretend this is your brain for a minute. Now this part of your brain that sits right back here is what I call warrior brain. And then this part of your brain, this part, this cerebral cortex and frontal lobe, is what I call human brain. Now inside warrior brain, there is a little structure, and you can see on the slide here, it's called an amygdala. Or I just call her Amy. And it's Amy's job to make your emotions work. It's Amy's job to basically recognize danger and get you prepared for danger. And, you know, if you're talking to somebody under the age of 25, I tell them that this frontal lobe part is your human part, and it's not even done growing till you're 25, which means you will only be smarter. But that's also the part that's in control of making decisions, predicting consequences, solving problems using logic. And what happens, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a future slide, is when there's a stress thing in our environment, Amy, this amygdala, when I show kids, I kind of point to my finger right here and I say, this is Amy, and this is your brain. And what happens when there's a threat in the environment is Amy, bing, goes off. Bing, bing. And when Amy goes off, she puts your body into warrior mode. And when you go into warrior mode, you don't have time to think. So your brain leaves. Not really, but you know, this part of your brain is no longer going to be getting as much energy. Right now, we're all about survival. And so when I say Amy's running the show or things like that, what I'm talking about and what I'm explaining is that process. And the reason why it works like that is because Amy's pretty old. You know, our warrior brain structures are so old that they think that we live, you know, thousands of years ago, and if there's a threat in our environment, it's probably a saber-toothed tiger or something coming after us. So, you know, if that were true 2,000 years ago and there was a tiger or something, would we have time to sit there and think about it? No, we wouldn't. We don't have time to sit there and be like, what should I do? Maybe I should just breathe and calm down. No, Amy's saying run, fight. And so that's why when you try to talk to somebody to self-regulate, they don't want to, because Amy and your biology is going against all of that. And it's not even able to really sometimes think about, oh, I should breathe and calm down. So that's basically how I explain this type of slide, using my hands, using my finger, talking about Amy to your everyday Joe. Now let's look at another slide. So this is a neuron, and this is basically the building block of our entire nervous system. Right here, I don't know if you guys can see if I'm pointing with my mouse. If somebody could say yes or no, that would be nice, because I'm kind of circling the cell body. But on the left, there's your dendrites, and what that does is it picks up chemicals from a cell in front of it. Yay! Maria says you can see it. And so, you know, a cell over here will release chemicals in here, and this cell will pick up the chemicals, and if there's enough stimulation, it will actually fire, and what we call an action potential, and I get really excited about neurobiology, so I apologize if I'm loud. And then at the end, down here, it will actually release chemicals, and it will go on to the next cell and so on and so forth. And that is how our nervous system communicates. So when we look at the nervous system, there is essentially two parts. There is the central nervous system on the right, which is our brain and our spinal cord. And so I was just looking at a text from Amy, sorry. And over here on the left is our peripheral nervous system. And our peripheral nervous system is composed of a somatic system, which is basically controlling our motor functions, being able to move, and sensation, being able to feel things. And then the autonomic nervous system is basically our regulation, our organs inside of us, everything. And it's kind of automatic. We don't really think about it. And so let's take a closer look now at the autonomic nervous system. The neuroendocrine system is a hormonal system, and what it does is it is regulated by the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, which were on the first slide, and it basically tries to keep the body in a homeostasis process, you know, and this is what really helped our ancestors to survive. And so when Amy is going off, then our sympathetic nervous system gets us aroused. It gets us going. That's when your heart speeds up really fast, your digestion will actually shut off, and you're going to have a little bit of adrenaline for a minute. And when that's over, you know, typically the initial response doesn't last very long, hopefully. And when that goes away, then your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and what it does is it will start to calm you down. And while that's happening, there's this nasty hormone called cortisol, which will stay in your body and hang out. And what it's going to do is a lot of things. it's going to, first of all, sometimes it will stimulate your appetite and make you crave things like carbohydrates and sugars. Because again, Amy's so old, she's saying, oh my gosh, there's a tiger, you need to run and you need to fight, and therefore you must eat. And so a lot of people end up developing diabetes and things because they're so stressed out all the time. They're, and they're eating. And usually we're not actually needing to use our muscle mass to fight something. And so we're overeating. And so basically, we're going to fight and we're going to flee and we're going to eat. And all these things are happening on a biochemical level. So that's kind of what's happening inside of us. And I've seen kiddos that have stress and they're constipated. And they've gone through every kind of medical treatment and nothing works. And I teach them how to calm themselves down and boom, they're no longer constipated. So this really does impact our whole bodies, not just the way we think, feel, and act. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of this idea that neurons that fire together wire together. But there's a complex process that happens. And every time, we looked at the neurons earlier, every single time that they connect with each other and one neuron puts chemicals into another neuron and it fires, it starts getting used to it. It's basically creating a pathway. And so this picture shows that down here on, this cell right here is the button of a cell before it, and this is a new dendrite. And what it's doing is it's releasing chemicals into this gap. And see, look, after a lot of exposure, now all of a sudden there's more receptor sites. Okay, so, practice makes perfect, so to say. So if somebody's experiencing stress and trauma, and their brain is constantly telling them, run, fight, hide, don't trust anyone, suddenly those connections are even stronger and stronger and stronger. So that the wiring of the brain interacts with our environment. And as our neurons connect, they make a bunch of different connections, obviously. So when we're first born, we don't have a lot of neural networks here. You can see when we're born, we only have a few. The babies have the rooting reflex. Their body knows how to digest. They're pretty good at crying and pooping, but not a lot of other things, right? So it's our environment and our experiences that then help us create all these neural connections. And by elementary age, we are just thriving with all these brain connections that are all the result of our experiences really early on. And then once we go into puberty, we actually have pruned off a lot of them. So, we're born with a few, then we get a bunch, and then our brain decides, okay, these connections are important. I'm not really using these ones. I'm going to get rid of these. So by the time we hit puberty, our brain is pretty much wired. And we can change that later. But the majority of the stuff happens very, very, very early on. So what about neglect? So, this was a study done a long time ago in the 60s. And it basically shows that if they took rats and they put them by themselves in an impoverished environment, and then they looked at synaptic density, and they didn't find near as many chemicals as those rats that had enriched environments. So again, I'm just trying to highlight the importance of understanding that our environment impacts our brain and therefore impacts who we are as people, what we do, what we see. So imagine there's two different pathways that can happen. There's a lot, but worst case scenario to best case scenario. So in the first scenario, there's a child that's maybe grown up in a very scary place. And so what they have learned is the world is dangerous. I can't trust anybody. And their brain has said, okay, let's enable them to survive this dangerous environment. So all their experiences cause all these stress chemicals to be constantly produced. Things like neglect, abuse, being at war are for our vets, for our veterans, and if any of you are here, thank you for your service. All have a really big impact on how we develop. The sculpting of the brains are wired for certain characteristics. So like being edgy or hot-tempered, hypervigilant. People that have been through a lot of stress, can be observed to be kind of short-tempered, irritable, and people that know me well would say that that's true for me as well. So, when I talk about understanding, if you work with, and I know some of you work in the justice system, I'm really glad to see you guys here today. If you're working with people that are very difficult, and you can understand that this is a biological thing that their brain has trained them for, my hope would be that you would then understand instead of blame. And if we have to blame something, we can blame the trauma or we can blame the brain. Oops, it's the brain. But really just kind of understanding these people aren't necessarily choosing to be the way that they are. It's because of their life experiences. On the other hand, down here on the bottom, someone that's born in a safe environment and is nurtured and can depend on people, their brain doesn't wire the same way. Their brain basically says, okay, you're going to be fine, so let's try to help you be, prime you for relationships, prime you for connecting with other people, and all those things. Now, while somebody exposed to tons of stress might be really good at living in a hard environment, there is a downside to that. When there's a lot of cortisol and stress hormones in our body, they hang out for a long time. And our bodies are only designed to be able to be under stress for about 20 minutes at a time. So, there's a tiger, we run, we fight, we hide, we do what we have to do, and then we go throughout our day. So for somebody that's constantly in a state of stress, these hormones are just building up and building up. And what they do is they actually can cause your brain cells to die and result in early death, essentially. So there is a downside to that. So this is what happens on an individual level when people are exposed to stress. But what happens to the population as a whole? Why does this matter? Well, it matters because we know that it affects a lot of things. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about the ACE study, which was done by a couple of researchers, Dr. Rob Anda and Dr. Vincent Validi. And what they wanted to look at was what happens when there's a lot of stress on a population. And they took about 17,000 people. And these were high, mostly well-educated, middle-class European people. And they were under the Kaiser Health Insurance Plan. So they had some of the best insurance in the world. And this is where they got their participants from. And they said, all right, let's ask them these questions on this handout, which I purposely didn't put in the presentation because I don't really want to focus too much on the problem. But they asked them, and then they said, let's look at the health outcomes and see what happens. And what they found was astonishing. Oh, there it is. It is on the right. So you can look at it there if you'd like to. Thank you, Amy. So they asked these questions, and what the first thing that they noted was that ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, are actually very common. And they found that, some 25% of people experience parental divorce, 28% experience physical abuse when they were a child. So one of the first takeaways was that, yes, ACEs are very common, and even among the middle-class educated population. And then what they found was even more astonishing, and actually, to be honest, a little depressing. They found a dose-response relationship with pretty much any kind of medical problem you can think of. And what that means is that the higher somebody's ACE score is, the more likely they were to have these negative outcomes. And it's kind of like the no-dust study, right? Like, we know that. But it was the first time science really did a great job of showing it and getting us some really interesting numbers. There's tons of charts that show it's, the dose-response relationship with not only mental health and substance abuse problems, but also liver disease, COPD, asthma, diabetes, suicide attempts, fetal deaths. So really, really powerful relationship between what goes on in our childhood and what happens later on in life. This is another kind of nice slide, and what they decided to do was they took all the problems that the research estimate, or some of them, are caused by adverse childhood experiences, but then they did a population attributable risk calculation, which is kind of this really fancy epidemiology way of looking at how much of each thing can we delegate, or how much of each thing could be prevented. So if we prevent ACEs, if we can prevent children from going through these adverse experiences, how much could we actually see a change in these problems that we see as a population? And these numbers are huge right here. So for example, if you look at life dissatisfaction, that oil slick going over it, 67%. What that means is that if we were to get rid of ACEs, we would see a reduction of life dissatisfaction by 67%. And when they do these studies, you almost never see numbers this high. there's usually a lot of confounding variables. So this was pretty powerful statistics right here that really kind of hit the nail with, these things that are happening to people are, really responsible for a lot of things they see. And I want to say too, I don't know if anybody has your ACE score. If you know it, feel free to share it in the box below, because that would be kind of interesting. And I'll make a comment about that later if people input those. So what do we do? Like, our DNA is interacting with our environment, the nature nurture thing. Well, another thing I wanted to just briefly mention, because it's so exciting, is this idea of epigenetics. Epigenetics. They didn't even talk about this when I was in grad school, and I'm really not that old. But it's this fascinating, brand new field. And what it's showing is that this little thing down here that I'm circling with my mouse is a marker. And so we're born with the DNA that we get, but there's these little markers that sit on our DNA. And if things happen in the environment, then these things will come out. So maybe somebody's pre-exposed to schizophrenia, and maybe they grew up in a healthy, nurturing environment, and guess what? They don't ever get it. But maybe they're in a bad environment, and suddenly your DNA says, all right, it's time for this thing to come out. And all of a sudden now they have it. So your DNA actually is changing with the environment. So when we talk about nature and nurture, I'm kind of really leaning towards nurture now. Like, we're born with the genes we get, but they actually change as a result of our environment. So it's very, very exciting. And what I want to say about that is, it's not just, I don't believe this epigenetics markers are just bad things. What if there's amazing things, right? If we talk about the solution, what if there's this amazing talent or ability or something, and we grow up in a nurturing environment and that comes out? So it doesn't all have to be bad, right? We can wire our brains for good too. So let's switch gears. Let's switch gears and let's talk more about the solution, okay? I've spent about, we had the technical difficulties, about 17 minutes on the problem. We're getting rid of it. I don't want to talk about the problem anymore. Does everybody feel like they kind of understand what goes on with the brain and how it can create certain difficult things in ourselves and others? And I am still waiting for people, if you want to, in the chat box, throw out an ACE score. I guess you don't have to. It's personal. But I'm just kind of curious where everybody is, and because I'm guessing that the ACE scores in this very room are probably high. And I underscore that because when we talk about trying to help youth or help others, but really it starts with us. It's going to start with us. It's you, it's me, it's everyone here. So let's go on and let's talk about resiliency. I love this picture. This is one that I show my students. And it just shows, look at this little girl. Almost half of her left hemisphere of her brain is gone. And here she is doing ballet. So even though we can come in contact with stress and it can change our brain, we can also rewire our brain. And it's really, really exciting. So when we talk about resiliency, there's three big things that they look at. And one is our capabilities. So if we want to promote resiliency, whether it's in ourselves and others, we need to be capable. And that means that we are noticing what we're good at, and it means that you as a provider are noticing what others are good at. Are you going to talk to that juvenile that's coming back for the third time? Oh, what'd you do now? Oh man, you're just constantly getting in trouble. Why are you making such poor decisions? Or are you going to say, well, dang, you're pretty good at being sneaky? Or, wow, how did you get so good at music? Seems like you really like to dance. You're creative, right? Finding those things. And I say everybody really should, if you're going to give somebody a negative comment, give them 3 positives and give them those before. Here's what I love about you. This is what's awesome about you. Here's a concern. So our capabilities. It's also about our self-efficacy. Feeling in control of our environment. I'm just going to go to the next one, too, while I talk about this. Because these are all programs that we know support early childhood. But it's about having options. So giving kids chores, giving people tasks, giving them things to feel good about themselves. And it's also, when we talk about our capabilities, it's also about self-regulation. Learning how to calm down, learning how to manage our emotions, regulating. And so this slide just basically kind of, again, underlines the importance of early intervention. So when we look at human development, it's like a tower, right? You start with a foundation, you build a strong foundation, and then you build your tower. If you build your tower and you try to go back and rebuild it, it is going to be a lot more expensive, right? And so when we want to prevent, if we want to prevent ACEs, we really need to start when mom and dad are planning on having a baby. Really, ideally, in a perfect world, we would be preventing it before people are even conceived. But there's a lot of research that shows that investing early pays off. So when we talk about policy and systematic advocacy, it's something to really think about as your early intervention programs. So here's our thing. What about attachment and belonging? Very important. And this is why I'm here, I promise. It's because we need to have attachments with people who care about us. Caring, competent people. This is you. This is you. This is every person you interact with. You can actually be promoting resiliency by just connecting with them. And the majority of the people who really made big impacts on me probably have no idea that they did. You don't have to spend hours a day with somebody. You know, it's when the teacher writes a smiley face on a paper and says, good job. Or when someone says, wow, you're pretty creative at writing. Or when somebody says, I know you're trying, you're working so hard, even though it's so hard for you. You know, you make those tiny little comments, and what you're doing is you're promoting resiliency. And then the final part is, this is society. Creating a community and a culture where people are supporting each other. And that's what we're doing right now, I hope. I hope right now by this presentation that you guys that we're kind of talking about how can we promote people, how can we build each other up, how can we, you know, invest in those stakeholders out there in the community that can be expert leaders to make change. Come together, you know, let's use our results, let's celebrate success and do what works. So those are the 3 part of capabilities. And again, I wrote a note to myself, people who have a hard time, difficulty with emotion, you know, picking up social cues, problems with addiction and other things can be really challenging for all of us. And again, when we talk about how can we promote others, it says change is up to us, but it really starts with us. We have to work on ourselves. We have to get better ourselves. We have to heal together and not be shameful and be proud in order to really do this in our communities and with other people and those that we serve. So self-care. If you guys would like to, in the chat box, really quickly, I'd like you to write down what is your favorite self-care leisure activity. I'm going to start. I'm writing exercise, motorcycle, snowboarding. I just busted those out. If you can't think of one right now, just off the top, yeah, kayaking, nature, I love all those things. Great, working out, love that too. This is very important, and a lot of times caregivers, we end up kind of taking care of everybody else and not taking care of ourselves. So this is just the importance of that, and this handout is available to you, I believe, in the handouts that I sent. I could talk more about this, but I'm not going to, unfortunately, because I am being mindful of time, and I want to talk to you about some coping skills that are really awesome. But very important to take care of yourselves. And if you're not able to think of what it is, if you're sitting there going, what is it that I like to do? Then I challenge you to 30 minutes to 1 hour a day, and you're going to figure that out. And you're going to engage in something. Very important. If you don't take care of yourselves, you're going to burn out, and you're not going to be able to take care of other people. Other tips, exercise, eating healthy, sleep, relaxation, all these things are important. Very important, but I'm just going to breeze through it. All right, so the power of our breath. You guys are still typing. Keep it up. I love that. So let's go back to this. Okay, so you're talking to a kiddo or a family, and you're trying to explain to them the reason why they freak out all the time, and you're like, but there's something you can do. And what you can do is really, honestly, breathing is one of the most powerful things that there is. So think about a baby, and when you look at babies, you see their tummy goes up and down when they breathe. They're the only humans that are doing it the right way. The rest of us tend to breathe with our chests. And why that is I think that when we start like walking as toddlers, we're like, woo, and we get so excited that we kind of start breathing with our chest. So the first rule is you need to breathe with your chest, or your stomach. And when I talk to kiddos, I say, pretend like you're blowing up a balloon in your tummy. So you want to breathe in through your nose for 5 seconds. Then blow up your tummy. And then you want to hold that breath for 5 seconds. And then you want to take your mouth and put it just like a straw, and you want to go for 6 seconds. Okay, it doesn't look like this. No, you have to really, really take your time, and you want to do that at least 7 times. And what you can do is you can give yourself a number between 0 and 10. 10 means I'm freaking out. 0 means I'm calm. And the kiddo will be like, I'm a 10! Or, some places that are trauma-informed, kids go like this to show that they've lost their lid or whatever. Or I go like this. Amy's running the show. So let's breathe and get your brain back so we can solve the problem. What else was I going to say about breathing? It's very important. And again, you're not going to want to do it. Nobody wants to do it because it goes against your biology. So by understanding that and explaining that, you can tell people, you're not going to want to do it because Amy's going to tell you have to run and fight. But why don't you just try it? Give yourself a number. Do it 7 times. If we had time, I'd do it with you right now, but we don't. And then re-rate yourself. And if you did it properly, oops, did I do something? Can you guys? No. All right, now, sorry. I was saying the technology is awesome, but also it can cause problems sometimes. The bottom line about breathing is it will work. And I've worked with a lot of people with anger and anxiety and whatever. And I tell them, if you do this breathing exercise and you're still having a panic attack, you didn't do it right. It will work. Um, so the other big tool I want to make sure everybody gets before we wrap up on how to promote resiliency is to, can you guys hear me now? Mary said she couldn't hear me, so I just want to make sure people can hear me. Yes, no, is the power of our thoughts. And so when we have a automatic thought, something like I'm stupid, that's probably going to be making Amy fire. Amy's going, ah, can still barely hear you. Is better? Yay. Yay? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Thank you, Jasmine. So if there's a thought that's triggering Amy, we need to address that. So just real quick, on the left is some examples of stinking thinking. I'm not going to go over them each with you, but this is like my favorite one-page handout because it has pictures and examples, and it's only 1 page. So the classic example I use on the right is a thought record. So let's say that I'm a kiddo and I just failed my math test and I'm feeling so at the top square, what happened? I failed my math test. Example, emotion, depressed, guilty, ashamed. Negative thought, I'm stupid. Okay, so if you're thinking you're stupid, you're probably going to trigger Amy. Okay, and so if you can do all the breathing in the world, but if you're having stinking thinking, Amy's just going to trigger again. So you breathe, you calm yourself down, you get your thinking powers back, and you say, thanks, Amy, but no thanks. I forgot when I'm breathing. I always tell people when you breathe in through your nose, just pay attention to what it feels like going in your body. When you're holding the breath, do this little flip and say, thank you, Amy. You can acknowledge your warrior, but it's time to go. And then when you breathe out, just pretend like you're getting rid of all that cortisol, and those visuals help. And then you want to evaluate your thought. So where's the evidence that says that you're stupid? There's a devil on one shoulder, there's an angel on one shoulder, or this box could be the prosecution, and this box is the defense right there. Where's the evidence that says you're stupid? You want to acknowledge it. I failed my math test, so-and-so thinks I'm stupid, everybody else passed. Acknowledge the evidence, it's fueling your thought, but then you have to go to the other side and say, is there any evidence against this idea? I did good in my science class. My mom thinks I'm smart. I didn't even study for the test. And then you want to reframe your thought so that the next time you think I'm stupid, you do what I call a ninja chop and go whoosh. Stop that thinking and think instead, well, maybe I'll study harder next time. Or maybe math just isn't my best subject, and so on and so forth. Lots of great tools like this at psychologytools.org if you're more interested in learning how to kind of restructure thoughts. When we restructure thoughts, we are changing our brain. And so it's pretty exciting and awesome. And then the final idea that I like to talk about is the two-trail analogy. And so when you're trying to rewire your brain or somebody else's brain, you're basically going up against what your brain has already learned. Remember we talked about earlier how those connections get stronger. And so I tell people, pretend like you're walking down the road and you come to the end of the road, and all of a sudden the road stops and there's two trails. So this trail on the right here is a sidewalk. Okay, that's your freak out trail. It's your irritability, all of those things. It's easy, right? You can just run down the sidewalk. You don't even have to think about it. Like, yay, right? We don't have to try to freak out. Or our customers and clients, it seems pretty easy for them, right? But when you're trying to do a new behavior like breathing or monitoring your thinking, it's really a lot of effort because your brain hasn't made those connections yet. And so it's kind of like the trail on the left. It's rocky, there's trees in the ways. All these things. Can you hear me now? I don't know, it shouldn't have changed. So when you are, you're going to need energy to take this new trail. So if you're hungry, angry, tired, or lonely, you're probably going to stay on the sidewalk. And that underscores, again, the importance of self-care. But if you've got that energy and you're able to take a breath, that's your boots. You need boots to go down this trail. And so you take a breath, you calm down, you get your thinking back, and that's kind of like you put your hiking boots on. And then you need some kind of a tool, like a machete, to chop down the trees, or a walking stick, and that's your thoughts. So if you're on a day when you're feeling like you've got the energy, you take your breath, you calm down, and you've got your tool, and you start going down this new trail. And what's going to happen the more you go down it? It's going to get a little bit easier, right? So when we're first working with somebody that's been traumatized, or we're trying to work on ourselves, it's very hard. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. And this is really important because I talk about this stuff all day long. And a lot of times people are like, yeah, I'm going to go make my new trail, and I'm going to breathe, and I'm so excited. And the next time I see them, they're like, well, I had a panic attack, I failed. Or my personal story, I have irritability. And I used to go on my sidewalk forever and yell and be like, ah! And I'd be like, how in the world can I help other people when I struggle with this? And I learned about neurobiology, and what I learned was Amy always gets the first go at it. So people are always going to go on the sidewalk first. And so you have to acknowledge that. And don't pay attention to the fact that somebody just freaked out on you. How long does it last? I used to run down a sidewalk for hours. And then what you do is you get embarrassed because you did and said stupid things, and you're like, well, I wouldn't be mad if you weren't, because you're trying to defend yourself. No, what you need to do is recognize, whoa, Amy's running the show, because you can jump from this trail to this trail. So don't be hard on yourself and others if you aren't always able to keep it together, because you're warriors trying to keep you alive, but just pay attention to how long you let it last. Now, when my Amy goes off, which she still does, it's almost always under a minute, if not 5 minutes. So pay attention to that. And so the final thing I really wanted to show you is this video. I don't know if it will work. I'm hoping it will. Maybe Amy can help show it. I really wanted time for questions and answers. I apologize for all the stuff. You guys can email me, or we can keep it going. I'm still free for a while if people have time. But I want, again, to imagine what it would be like if we all focused on the solution instead of the problem. What would it be like if instead of asking people, what's wrong with you, we said, how can I help? What do you hope for? What if we saw opportunity instead of dysfunction? What if we engaged with somebody with the relationship in mind instead of the purpose of the meeting? So let's look at this. This is really cool, and you can show this to your customers too. It's on YouTube if you look at neuroplasticity.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood. that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
All right. Anyway, I guess I have to end it now. I really appreciate everybody for coming. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I hope that this was somewhat helpful, and I'd be happy to do any other future trainings or webinars or follow-ups. Amy can put you in contact with me if you have more questions or concerns. Thank you. And if you look in the chat, Deb Bach, who's also an ACES presenter, an amazing ACES presenter, I have to say, that shared with me the self-care thing, has put on a nice link too. So I encourage you all to check that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree, for being here with us today and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. I know we're coming up on the 1 o'clock hour. If you do have time for questions, you can write them at resourcebasket@ruralcat.com, and we will be sure to connect you with Desiree in the best way that works for her. And you can place them in the chat box, and Desiree can chat with you for the next few minutes in the chat box there. We're going to just do one last quick poll before I show you the end with our resources, and we'll leave this screen up for a while so you can access the resources that Desiree has provided to you today. We just want to quick ask your general satisfaction and the helpfulness of today's presentation for you, in addition to the short, very short survey that we'll provide. And I'm going to expand this out for you. I, again, appreciate everyone's commitment to stay with us during some of our technical back and forth. I'm really grateful that the presentation and the content was able to come across from Desiree. So again, this is anonymous. I'm going to broadcast the results in just a moment to let everyone just share how helpful this has been. So thank you so much for sharing with us on that. All right, we're going to just tap through the rest of these slides. I'm going to move this over down to here. And just mentioned earlier that this training is part of the Supporting Youth webinar series that the Resource Basket and Alaska After School Network offers. Our next webinar in this series will be scheduled for November. On the bottom of your screen, which I will get to right now, is a live link that we hope you'll go to. Oh, it's on our other slideshow that we have. But we'll send out the live link to everyone with the recording and the resources, just to see real quickly how this helped you and any information or suggestions you have for our future webinar offerings. So what I am going to pull up is that resources box, which includes a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation, as well as other resources that Desiree has marked as useful and of interest to you, including a resource list with websites and links about ACES, particularly work happening in Alaska. We thank you so much for participating with us today on behalf of the Resource Basket and Alaska After School Network. It is 1 o'clock. We appreciate your being here, and please stay on the line in the chat box if you'd like to engage with Desiree for the next couple of minutes. And we are going to put up the survey for your brief evaluation comments into the chat box, which you'll be able to click as a live link. So thanks to participant Anna for providing that to us right now. So you can access that. Again, it's just like 4 to 6 quick questions that we appreciate hearing back from you on. If you'd like to connect with Desiree and with the Resource Basket again, just go to resourcebasket@ruralcap.com. Our website is resourcebasket.org, and you can also like us on Facebook. Have a great rest of your day.